Hey everybody, Braden here. Welcome back to another video. Today I would like to cover a new topic that we also covered last week, which was a year in review. So this time we're going to be covering 2018. It's about 5 years late, but 5 years is better than never at all. And since we're leading up to the new year, I thought it'd be really interesting just to look at the stats, both in classical and in blitz chess, and just try to draw some conclusions on how I was playing at the time. Because I actually did have pretty good progress during this year. So we will get to that. But let's start with some of the classical stats. First off, this year I played from about January to about August, and then I just kind of cut cold turkey after that, at least for classical chess. I played 25 games during this time, and funnily enough, I had 0 draws. I ended up winning 18 games and losing 7, and that affects the total stats. It's only this year and last year for playing chess, especially with classical. So now it's a total of 62 games, 35 wins, 7 draws, and 20 losses now. So a pretty positive score, which is always really nice. And when we get into it, the accuracy, which I thought would be really cool to cover, this is both covering, this is mainly, though, so the way this is calculated is centipawn loss. I just put everything through the Lichess database, so it's not like a local engine or anything. This is just more of like an interesting insight rather than like a cold hard fact, because an online engine is still going to be quite good. And the way I calculated this for what we'll see here, which is an average centipawn loss for the year of 38.2, which did bring down my average. My total average for my classical games now is 42.4. The way I did it was I weighted them by moves. So if I had an average centipawn loss of 10 for a game that was also just 10 moves, and I had a centipawn loss for of 20 for a game that was 40 moves, the way I would do it would be 10 times 10, because 10 centipawn loss for the 10 moves, so that's 100. And then I would add that to 20 times 40, and then I would divide them both by 50, which is the total moves between the two games. So that's how I would actually weight these things, which I think is the right way to do it. I could be wrong, but that's just like the way that made sense to me. And yeah, so my average centipawn loss 38.2, which means on average per move I was losing about 0.4 advantage, which is quite considerable when you think about it. Now getting into my best centipawn loss. So for last year, I didn't actually cover this, I believe, but my best centipawn loss of last year was 5. And that was game number 11, which I will also just put any games that I reference. I'll be putting those in the description. So game number 5, game number 11, which was a 5 centipawn loss. And my worst of 2017 was 118, which was game 6, just a little bit earlier. This year, I did not break my centipawn loss streak, because that 5 was just crazy. This time around, I ended up getting a 9 centipawn loss in one of my games. That was game number 43. Again, the links will be in the description there. And my worst centipawn loss this year was 77 from game number 62, which was the Sicilian, the game that I was my last game before I took a huge break. So so far, the worst centipawn loss I have for both years, just like every year's up to now, 2018, that is 118 for worst and 5 for best. So I didn't break either of my records. It's okay that I didn't break my record for worst centipawn loss, but it would have been nice to beat that for best. But you can't complain. At least I didn't get the 116 or higher than that. 118, my apologies. So another few interesting stats here. Game length. So last year it was 42. This year, 2018, it was 44. So now it's about 43 average. So my games are a little bit longer. I think there's something said that the average chess game's like 20 moves or something. I feel like that doesn't apply to tournament players though. It feels like my games are always super duper long. And fastest win, my fastest win in 2017 was 21. Same thing this year. It was also 21. Again, I will link those games in the description. Fastest loss, I lost in 14 moves in 2017. This year, I lost in 24. So luckily, I didn't break my record of a 14 move loss, which would not be fun. Now, my longest win was 95 moves in 2017, and I did not break that one, which I'm not too upset about either. I had a game where I won in 80 moves, but again, 80 moves is plenty long. Yeah, so that was the longest win, and the longest loss 2017 was 72 moves, and 2018 it was 48. So I didn't break that record either, which I'm not too upset about because, you know, the long losses, it just feels like you're getting grinded down. So not too upset about that either. For my longest game, which I had to add in there, I just had to, is 95 moves. It was the win that I had. It was the bishop and knight versus the bishop there. So, or no, the bishop and knight checkmate. So yeah, I had to include that for my stats, and that's still the record so far. That is the longest game I've played. So now let's talk about the top performances for national rating. So I'm going for national masters, so it kind of makes sense to cover national tournaments, and all these stats are related to classical games, but some of them aren't FIDE. So every one of them is CFC or Canadian National rated. And then that's what I mainly focused on. If I ever get NM, then I would probably adjust everything accordingly to fit FIDE, but it's also nice having my CFC games in here too, because I don't have many FIDE performances, especially for the first 2 years, 2017 and 2018. But for the CFC performances, 2017, I had 8 tournaments. My best performance was 1550, and my worst was 1226. And in 2018, luckily, yeah, I broke some records here. 1892 for my best and 1423 for my worst. So every single performance that I had this year was actually on the list of like my top 10 performances. For, you know, I played 14 events, and again, the 6 that I played in 2018 are all covered in that top 10, which is kind of a really good feeling there. Now for FIDE performances, this is where it gets funny, because I had 2 performances in 2017. I had a 1476, which was a pretty good performance. And then my second performance in 2017 was 438. So not the best, but, you know, got to include them all. So what I did there is I just did a FIDE rating like performance calculator. And I had like 1 or 2 games that event, and they're FIDE rated, and I lost them. So that's why you see that number. 2018, I only had 1 tournament that was FIDE rated. And that was 1449, which didn't even beat my best. So for FIDE at least, I didn't beat my best rating at all. But, you know, 1449 isn't so bad either. So that's kind of nice to have in there. So that is top FIDE performances. I have just 3 events after 2018, 1476, 1449, and 438 in 3rd place there. So for CFC ratings, which is the national rating again, in 2017, I started at 1306, which was my initial rating. I ended at 1421, so I gained about 120 points in the first year. And, 1421, my apologies. And at the end of the year, Yeah, 1421. And for 2018, I started at 1421, of course, but I ended at 1757. So I gained quite a bit of points there. I gained about 330 points in 2018, which is really nice to say. My average rating for 2017 was 1330. Now in this year, it was 1585. And the highs were, my highest rating this year was 1761. Let's move on. So FIDE ratings, 2018. You can see the previous stats. I only had like an initial rating of 1314 before. And this year I had a high of 1334. That's what I ended the year off with. Now, let's get into the openings. This is the fun stuff that people have been maybe waiting for here. So I only played E4 with white, and when I played E4 here, let's see here, my win percent was 69%, which is actually quite good. That's pretty hard to do. I believe I ended up playing against the Sicilian 6 times. I played against E5 6 times as well, and I played against the French only once this year. I won my French game. I won every single game against E5 this year. And against the Sicilian, I actually had a negative score. I believe I won 2 games and I lost 4 of them. So yeah, that actually contributed to part of my, I guess, like bad score in this year, at least for openings against E4. That's why it wasn't like a perfect score. It was because I had to play against the Sicilian. So tricky. But now we're getting to the black openings, and as black, I played against D4 or E4, my apologies, 8 times, and the win rate was 75%, which is quite good. Against D4, I had a 67% win rate. I only played 3 games in it, so not really too important. And I believe I played against a move that wasn't any of those, which was B3, and I won that game as well, I believe. So that was also nice. But that kind of covers it for the classical stats. Now it's time to get into the meat, which is the blitz games, which I think is really important to kind of look at for openings, because we can see how my intuition looks for a bunch of different positions that I was playing throughout the years here. So when we get into it, I played E4 1,400 times. I actually played a total of 3,100 blitz games in 2018, which is quite a bit. I had a high of 1836, a low of 1383. I started the year at 1445 and ended with 1751. Which is kind of funny because that's, I believe, also how I ended my my rating in classical for the year as well. My average elo was about 1,600, which was really nice as well, and I'm hoping to maybe even beat that for the following years. And for the white openings, I decided it would be interesting to check out the performance ratings here, or just like the win rates that I was having. So I had an overwhelming score against E5, which is nice. Actually, this year I had a positive score against nearly everything with E4. Positive score against King's Pawn, Sicilian, French, Scandinavian, Caro-Kann, Perk, and Alekhine. The only thing that wasn't positive was playing against G6, which I was 50-50 on. So it's not even a negative score. And as black, the only things I had a negative score against for the year was the English and B3. Everything else I was doing pretty okay, which was E4, D4, and Knight F3, which was even. So against E4, I played the Sicilian, which was my main weapon for like the first half of the year. And I had an okay win rate, but then I switched to the Caro-Kann about halfway through and started winning a lot of games, and that's one of my best performing openings. just behind just playing against e5. E5, that was like e4, e5 as white. That was like my best opening all year. And really close behind it was the Caro-Kann. Scandy's technically in second there, just because whenever I played against it, I had a win rate of 63%. And then the Sicilian, or the Caro-Kann, my apologies, I had a win rate of about 60%. So a little bit lower, but I saw a lot more Caro-Kanns, so I kind of trust that stat a little bit more than the Scandy. Anyways, so I am going to now switch over to a database, and we're going to kind of just look at how I decided to play against these types of openings. Just because I would really love to see how I was reacting then and how I would react now. Again, this is because it's about 5 years later that I'm getting to this one. So now I would like to see just how I was playing against certain openings. We're going to just be looking at e4 this year, just because that's kind of the only thing that really matters, because that's all I really played. I played everything else less than like 1% of the time, besides e4 here. So e4, I was seeing e5 the most, and I was just playing just the normal setup here of knight f3. I saw a little bit of the Petrov, and mainly I would see d6 if it weren't knight c6 here. Really not many Petrovs, but I had pretty good scores against everything here, which is really nice to say. I think it was mainly a confidence factor, and I think that's something people like to study at first, is e4, e5 openings when they're playing. Especially at the, like, around these levels, it just feels like white's just having all the fun. In the Sicilians, though, I was playing an open Sicilian. I only play open Sicilian. I think people that don't, they're just blundering on move 2. I'm just following Shanklin there in that assessment. So I played against d6 mainly, but there's a lot of knight c6 during the year. And funnily enough, I had a negative score against knight c6, as we can see. So if I went into the main line here, and we saw a move like knight f6, now the numbers get really bad for me, surprisingly. e5 I did okay against. I'd always play knight b5, some sort of d6 and c4 here. And we get some sort of like weird Maroczy structure that I like to play, just because I liked playing with a pawn on e4 and c4 when I could. But yeah, generally when my opponents would play something along those lines of knight c6, d4, and knight f6 here, I would really struggle. And I think it has to do with after e5 here, knight b5, it would just be a Sveshnikov where I didn't really know what I was doing, and I wouldn't have like studied it at all. I just knew like, oh yeah, I get a lot of good play, but yeah, I just did not have good results at all here. Not a lot of games, but still enough to raise alarm bells for sure. Now, going back to some other openings, there's g6, which is the hyper accelerated. I would always just play d4 and go into c4, like the Maroczy if I could, as I think that's a pretty nice setup to get. And in this position as well, if I was seeing e6, I would just go into an open as well. I pretty much only played open Sicilians because it's just what I like to play. And again, knight c6, if they played a move like this, then I also still kind of struggled a little bit. Notable game here, I played against Alexander Lenderman, and he crushed me in just a few moves, but that's besides the point. And going back, let's look at d6, because I think that's the most important part of Sicilian for this time. I would only play open pretty much. I played bishop c4 like twice. Yeah, I didn't really play anything except for open practically. And looking at this, it's funny because after knight f6, I have a negative score when we get into these Sicilians. So I mainly saw Najdorf. I saw a little bit of the dragon, and I saw practically nothing else. Like the classical Sicilian, I saw like 3 times with a perfect win rate, but only 3 games, it doesn't matter. And against g6, what I would do is I would play bishop to e3, and then after bishop g7, I would always play this bishop e2 move, which is like very, very quiet. And it's not really the most testing variation against the dragon. Normally you put the bishop on c4, or you play like f3 first or something, and then you put the bishop on c4. So I wasn't really testing the dragon this year. And the results kind of showed for themselves that, yeah, I just was getting negative scores against it. Against the Najdorf, I practically only play bishop g5. That's it. And after bishop g5, if people played moves other than the main lines, I was doing pretty okay. But if people were playing e6, which is one of the main lines, f4 here, I was struggling a little bit against other moves that wasn't bishop to e7. Bishop to e7 is now positive, but knight d7 or queen b6, any of these lines wasn't as good. Bishop e7, queen f3 was mainly played, queen c7, and I would castle. Yeah, about 50-50 results in these lines the further I go down them. But going back, that covers the Sicilian. So my results in the main lines weren't as great, and I think that's mainly because I wasn't as much of someone who would like to do opening prep. So maybe that's something I should have worked on a little bit, or maybe it's just positions that I wasn't good at playing against. So now getting into it, after c5 there, we have e6, the French, followed up. I always play d4, and against d5, some people would play like c5 there, but against d5, I would only exchange. I would just go into these really bland positions, but I had good results, relatively. I had a, in this position, let's see here, I had 60% win rate with taking on d5, which is kind of nice, but it gets really dry in boring positions where white's not really fighting for much. I think it was mainly because I was scared of the French structures that you generally get, like advanced French or the winnower positions, and it's just something I didn't want to study. So I pretty much just avoided that altogether, played e6, and got okay positions. Against d5, I would just take it. And after takes, I played quite a bit of knight f3 instead of knight c3. I think my idea here was I was trying to get in some like c4 and knight c3 to try to just like not get the tempo on the queen, just like let them move their queen, which I don't really know if that's the best strategy or not. I don't really think that might be correct, but anytime people played knight f6, I also just played like knight f3. I tried playing c4 here and there just to see, like, test people if they could actually hold on to the pawn or not, or if they know what to do. I had okay results here, which is not bad, because this isn't really the best way to play, because you weaken the d4 square quite a bit in these positions. Going back here, so that was the Scandinavian. And c6, which is the last big move that I'd like to look at here. After d5, I played a little bit of exchange, but I pretty much only played knight c3. I really like these positions in general because I was playing the Caro-Kann myself. Against knight f6, I had no prep against this move, so I wasn't really sure what to do. I played knight g3 quite a bit, trying to go into the lines that I did know, but that's not really the right way to play. And if people played bishop to f5 here, I would just play knight to g3 and h4 and go into these very, very well-known lines. Actually, sorry, knight f3 here, where you'd see the move, I believe, knight to d7 to avoid anything here. H5 here, bishop d3, the line goes on, and 50-50 results. Not a lot of games, but a few to make it notable. And that kind of covers it with the white pieces. So let's switch over to the black pieces now. So now with the black pieces, yeah, I saw e4 the most, and I mainly just played either Sicilian or Caro-Kann. My results with Caro-Kann were much better. With the Sicilians, let's just go through. Whenever people would play closed Sicilians, I had the best results. And in these in these lines, the Smith Mora, I actually struggled quite a bit. I don't have great results against it. I think it's actually a pretty good blitz weapon just because it gives a lot of initiative, right? So that could be a big reason why. In the open Sicilian here, I'd always play d6, d4, and we'd get into this position mainly. And yeah, I would only play the Najdorf. So I've seen a lot of moves here: bishop g5, bishop e3, bishop e2, and bishop c4, bishop d3. The only move that I really struggled against, actually, that I had a significant negative score against, was bishop g5. As when I went into the lines, I think a lot of people know these lines quite well if they're Najdorf players, where you play this move queen to f3, queen c7, long castles here, knight bd7. And yeah, I would just struggle in these positions as black. And maybe that's a big reason as to why I actually made the switch to the Caro-Kann. So going back, let's look at the Caro-Kann. Caro-Kann is what I started playing a little bit more. I have more games, I believe, in the Sicilian, just a little bit more, about 50 more, but a fair amount there still. I would see either d4 or knight f3, but I think d4 is the most important one to cover here because that goes into those main lines. I would see advance the most and pretty good results against it. Actually, in the exchange, I had the worst results with moves like c4 here, which I can understand why. Playing against IQP can be very difficult, especially when it feels like there's problems with initiative. And I was always really scared of initiative, but I was happy to play against it because IQP is supposed to be a weakness here. It's supposed to be a weakness, but I underestimated the strengths of the IQP and how much activity the person with the pawn can get. So I think that was a huge problem of myself during that year. But when I saw knight c3, I had pretty okay results against it. I would always go for this line, bishop to f5. Here, go with these e6, like these knight d7 lines, very consistently. And yeah, I had okay results. So it was about 50-50. But as black, that's not such a bad thing. But against the advanced, I actually played really, really well against it here. So yeah, pretty much every single line I had a positive score, and the ones that I didn't, there's not enough games for it to matter anyways. So yeah, whenever I see knight f3 and get into these types of positions, I was generally quite happy, unless my opponent played bishop to d3. And I think it's because I didn't know a certain line. So this is kind of like a fun fact for people. In this type of position, there's a good move here, queen a5 check, where you can play this move queen to a6. And it's very frustrating for white because they want to castle, but it's hard to without trading queens. And it's important that the knight is on f3 here, because if the knight's on f3, they can't block with like knight e2 in castle. And it feels like these endgames, black has just a little bit more fun than white. So that's the Caro-Kann. Going back here, that's pretty much how I played against e4. Now we're going to cover d4. We're not really going to get into c4 or knight f3 because they're kind of close enough to d4. But against d4 here, what we saw was pretty much only King's Indians. C4, G6, Knight C3, Bishop G7, E4, and D6. I played quite a bit of them, and I had okay results. Whenever people went into more main lines, I was happy. But if people went into a specific variation here, which was F3, I actually struggled quite a bit against it because I wasn't too familiar with what to do here. I wasn't familiar with what is now like a pretty common move. I think it's c5 here, which is a pawn sacrifice line. But black gets pretty good play in this position here. So that's something I probably should have known because it's only like 2 or 3 moves in, and I've played against it quite a bit. So yeah, that's a big weakness there, and that's a big reason why I also kind of switched out of the King's Indian, because it felt like it was just a lot of suffering. So what can you do? But anyways, that actually covers it for just like a brief overview of my blitz openings. I think, again, the interesting things were when I was playing like the sharper positions, I was struggling a little bit. And those E6 Sicilians, also my French repertoire was not challenging. And also, lastly, the interesting thing is, yeah, again, I didn't have anything prepped against the Samish here, when it's not really that uncommon of an opening. F3 is very common, so I should have really had something against it. But that's going to cover it for my 2018 year in review. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys for my 2019 review. Bye-bye.